The envelope had her name spelled wrong, not a small mistake, not a transposed letter or a smudged ink, but a name that had been shortened, flattened, stripped of the second syllable her mother had always insisted upon. The lawyer slid it across the table without meeting her eyes, and Claire Marsh picked it up the way you pick up something that has already decided to disappoint you. The paper was thin. The room smelled of old carpet and printer toner and the particular kind of quiet that exists in offices where people receive bad news and are expected to leave quickly. She had driven 4 hours to be here. Her brothers had flown. And now she sat at the end of the table holding an envelope with her name misspelled, while the lawyer read aloud from a document that divided a life into columns. The house went to Daniel. The savings account split between Robert and Marcus. The car, the tools, the paintings, the silver candlesticks their mother had bought in a market in Portugal 30 years ago on a trip she had taken alone and never fully explained. Each item assigned, each name called, and each time the lawyer's finger moved down the page, Claire watched her brothers' faces and understood that they had known. Maybe not everything, but enough. When the lawyer finally reached the last item on the list, he cleared his throat with the soft apology of a man who has done this before. Parcel 7, the document called it, a piece of land, 31 acres, in a county 2 states away, a place called Harrow Flat. No structures of value, no road access from the main highway. Soil quality described in a 1987 agricultural survey as marginal at best. It had been left to the daughter. Daniel looked at his coffee. Robert straightened his tie. Marcus, who had flown business class and still somehow looked like he'd slept on a bus, made a sound that might have been a laugh. "That land's been cursed since before we were born," he said, and nobody in that room argued with him. Claire held the envelope with her name spelled wrong and looked out the window at a parking lot full of ordinary cars, and she thought about her mother's hands, how they had always been moving, folding, building, smoothing something down. She had no idea, sitting in that chair at the end of that table, that those 31 acres in Harrow Flat were about to answer every question she had stopped letting herself ask. But to understand this, we have to go back to the beginning. Not to that lawyer's office and its smell of old carpet, but to a white house on a hill outside a small Tennessee town, and a woman named Vera, and a garden that Vera kept alive through 2 droughts and 1 winter that cracked the pipes 3 times and still never managed to kill the roses she'd planted along the south wall. Claire was the youngest of 4, the only daughter, born late, a surprise, her father had always said, with the smile of a man who means something slightly different by the word. Her brothers were grown and gone by the time she started school. She had been raised, in most of the ways that matter, as an only child, with a mother who read aloud in the evenings, and a father who was kind when he was present and absent, more often than he should have been. Vera Marsh was not a simple woman, though she allowed people to believe she was. She kept her garden and her opinions and her secrets with the same quiet diligence. She had grown up poor in a county that did not forgive poverty, had married young, had raised children who went on to become men who wore good shoes and forgot to call. And she had never complained about this, not once, not in any form that Claire had ever witnessed, which was, Claire had come to understand as an adult, its own kind of statement. The land in Harrow Flat had belonged to Vera's family before Vera was born. Claire knew almost nothing about it. It had come up once, when she was perhaps 11 or 12, during a car ride that she only half remembered, her mother mentioning a field, a well, something about her own father having worked that ground before the family moved. Claire had been looking out the window at the time, watching telephone poles go by, and the conversation had drifted into other things, the way conversations do when you are 11, and the world outside a moving car is more interesting than history. She had not thought of it again for 30 years. Now she drove home from the lawyer's office with the envelope on the passenger seat and her brother's voices still echoing somewhere behind her teeth. Cursed land. Marginal at best. The clear, comfortable way they had dismissed it, the way you dismiss something you have already decided is not worth the trouble of examining. She had one photograph of her mother's father, a man standing in a field, squinting into the sun, holding his hat. The field looked flat and pale and enormous. She had never known where the photo was taken. She thought about it now for the first time in decades, and her hands tightened on the steering wheel without her meaning them to. There is a specific kind of grief that arrives late, after the initial numbness and the paperwork and the casseroles from neighbors have all been cleared away. It arrives quietly, the way a draft arrives in a house you thought was sealed, through some gap you hadn't noticed, touching the back of your neck. Claire felt it the morning she looked up Harrow Flat on a map. It was a Thursday, 6 weeks after the reading of the will. She had gone back to her apartment in Columbus, back to her job managing accounts for a mid-sized architectural firm, back to the routines that had organized her life for the past 12 years. She had put the envelope in a drawer. She had called her brothers twice, and neither call had been returned. She had watered her plants and bought groceries and watched the light change on the buildings outside her window the way it does in October, going gold and then thin and then grey. And then on a Thursday morning, for no reason she could have named, she opened her laptop and typed the name into a search bar. Harrow Flat. The county came up first, then an old real estate listing, years out of date, describing the area as rural and undeveloped, access via County Road 7, no utilities, no structures. Then a single line in a local historical society's archive, scanned poorly, almost unreadable, a mention of land grants in the region dating from the early 1900s, and a name, Vera Harrow. Claire stared at that for a long time. Her mother's maiden name had been Harrow. She had known this, of course, and yet she had never connected it to the land, had never thought to ask why a piece of ground in a county 2 states away happened to carry the same name as her mother's family. Had never asked, really, much about where her mother came from at all, not with the specific patient curiosity of someone who understands that a person's origins are not preamble, but story. The coffee beside her went cold. She booked a drive for the following Saturday. The county road that led to Harrow Flat was not on any GPS system Claire trusted. She found it through a combination of printed directions from a county website and a gas station attendant named Percy, who had the particular stillness of a man who has lived in one place his entire life and finds the confusion of outsiders more interesting than irritating. Harrow Flat, Percy said, and he said it the way you say a place you have known since childhood, with the vowels settled and certain. You got family out there. I inherited some land, Claire said, 31 acres. Percy nodded slowly. The Harrow parcel. He did not ask how she was related to the Harrows. He simply turned and pointed through the window at a road she would have missed without him, a pale gravel track disappearing between 2 stands of dry October trees. Follow that about 4 miles. You'll know when you found it because the fence line starts. What kind of fence? Old kind, Percy said. She thanked him and drove. The trees on either side of the gravel road were post oak and hackberry, their leaves already turned and many of them already down, lying soft and brown across the gravel like something the road was trying to cover up. The sky was wide and pale. There had been rain 2 days before, and the air still held it, cool and faintly metallic, the smell of wet clay and wood. The fence appeared exactly as Percy had said it would. Old cedar posts gone silver with decades of weather, wire that had been mended in several places with wire of a slightly different gauge. Someone had taken care of this fence, though not recently. The care was old, the neglect was newer. Claire pulled off the road and got out of the car. The land on the other side of the fence was flat, as the name suggested. Flat and wide and pale, covered in dormant grass the color of dried hay. There was a tree line about half a mile to the north, cottonwoods or possibly willows, the kind of trees that follow water. There was no building visible, no structure of any kind. Just the land, stretching out under that October sky, enormous and quiet. She stood at the fence for a long time. Then she found the gate. It was set back from the road, half hidden by a growth of cedar that had encroached on both sides over many years, and it was locked. But the lock was not a combination lock or anything complicated. It was a simple hasp and padlock that had rusted into a specific shade of orange. And the key was on the ring the lawyer had given her along with the envelope, with her name misspelled. The key turned. Of course it did. Something about the ease of it made her chest ache. She drove her car through the gate, got out and closed it behind her out of some instinct she couldn't have explained, and then drove slowly across the flat ground toward the tree line. The ground was firmer than she expected. The grass whispered under the tires. Two crows lifted from somewhere to her left, their calls flat and brief and immediately swallowed by the silence. At the edge of the cottonwoods there was a creek. Not large, 10 feet across at most, moving low with the season, its banks marked by the pale and reaching roots of the trees above. And beside the creek, almost invisible under 20 years of encroaching vegetation, there was a structure. Claire turned off the engine. She sat in the car for a moment, looking at it through the windshield. She rolled down the window and listened to the creek, and the wind in the cottonwood leaves and the faint, dry sound of dead grass moving. Then she got out and walked toward it. The structure was a cabin, though calling it that was generous. It was one room, built of stone, with a roof that had partially collapsed on the east side and been partially repaired with corrugated metal at some later date. The door was wood, swollen shut in its frame. The single window on the south wall had lost its glass and been boarded from the inside with what appeared to be planks from a packing crate. Written across the top of those planks, in letters that had faded to almost nothing but were still legible in the right angle of light, were 6 words. Claire leaned close. "Come back when you're ready, V." She stood in the doorway, with one hand on the wood frame, and read those words 3 times. Her breath was visible in the October air. The creek ran soft and low behind her. The cottonwood leaves came down one at a time, unhurried, and settled around her feet. V. Not a word. A letter. Her mother's name began with V, but her mother had never been here. Had she? She tried the door. It took her shoulder and her full weight and a count of 3 before the wood gave, scraping against the stone floor with a sound like something dragged from sleep. Inside, the air was cold and close and smelled of stone and old wood and something drier underneath, something that reminded her of library books, old paper, the slow exhalation of ink. In the corner, beneath a piece of oilcloth that had been tucked into place with the deliberate care of someone preparing for a long absence, was a wooden box. Claire knelt beside it. The oilcloth was stiff with cold but not brittle. Whoever had placed it here had known something about preservation. She lifted it back. The box was cedar, roughly made but sturdy, with dovetailed joints cut by hand and a small iron latch that required no key. She lifted the latch and opened the lid, and the smell that rose from it was astonishing. Cedar and beeswax and something faintly sweet she could not name, and underneath all of that, the unmistakable smell of her mother. Not a metaphor. She knew this smell. It was the smell of Vera's hands, of her kitchen in December, of the small cedar chest where she had kept winter sweaters, and a few things she never discussed. Claire sat back on her heels and looked at the contents of the box and did not touch them yet. A stack of letters, bound with kitchen twine. A small glass bottle with a cork stopper, empty, its inside filmed with something that had long since dried. A folded document, heavy paper, the kind used for official purposes. A photograph. And at the very bottom of the box, wrapped in a square of flannel cloth, something small and dense that clinked softly when she shifted the box. She picked up the photograph first. It was the same man she had seen in her one photograph of her mother's father. The same squint, the same hat held at his side, but this photograph was different. He was not in a field. He was standing in front of the stone cabin, one hand on the doorframe, his expression caught between a smile and something more careful, something that knew the camera was a kind of record. On the back, in handwriting, she did not recognize but which bore a faint resemblance to her mother's. Thomas Harrow, 1951. This is where it starts. She turned the photograph over and looked at the cabin in the background of the image. And then she looked up at the cabin around her, and the air moved the way air moves in a sealed room when something has been opened. She stayed for 2 hours that first day. She did not read the letters. She documented everything with her phone, each item photographed in place before she touched it. She noted the dimensions of the box, the condition of the oilcloth. She ran her fingers along the dovetailed joints and tried to estimate their age. She found, scratched into the stone of the south wall, just beside where the window had been, a date, 1948. The cabin had been built the year before her mother was born. Claire drove back to the motel in town that night and ate a sandwich she had brought from Columbus and thought about her grandfather Thomas, whom she had never met. who had died before she was born, who had built a cabin on 31 acres of flat land beside a creek and left a message on a boarded window for someone he called V. She thought about her brothers and their quick dismissals and the sound Marcus had made that might have been a laugh. She thought about her mother's hands. In the morning, she went back. She read the letters in order, sitting on the floor of the stone cabin with her back against the south wall and the weak October sun coming through the opening where the window had been, lying pale and thin across the floor beside her. There were 14 letters. The first was dated 1952, written in the hand she had identified on the photograph's back, Thomas Harrow's hand, or someone who had known him very well. The earliest letters were practical. Notes about the land, about water rights, about the creek and its behavior in wet years versus dry. Thomas Harrow, it became clear, had not merely built a cabin on this land. He had lived here, had worked it, had fought over several years and across several letters addressed to a county board for the right to keep it. The fourth letter was from someone else, a lawyer, as it happened, though not the kind her brothers had hired. This lawyer worked for a company called Meridian Land Holdings, and his letter was politely written and entirely clear. The Harrow family's claim to Parcel 7 was being disputed on the basis of an unpaid mineral rights assessment from 1939. The letter was dated 1954. Thomas Harrow would have been, by Claire's estimation, in his early 40s. She turned to the fifth letter. Thomas had written back. His handwriting was steady and the arguments were careful, and she could feel, reading them, the particular fury of a man who has been told that something he built with his hands does not entirely belong to him. The mineral rights. She looked up from the letters and out through the open window at the flat, pale land stretching toward the fence line. Mineral rights. She thought about the agricultural survey in her mother's documents, the one that had described the soil as marginal at best. You described soil as marginal when you were talking about crops. You described mineral rights when you were talking about something else entirely. She picked up the folded document from the box. It was heavy in her hands. The paper had stiffened with age, but had been protected by the cedar and the oilcloth and did not crumble. She unfolded it carefully, in sections, the way you unfold something that has waited a long time. It was a geological survey, private, not governmental, dated 1953, commissioned by someone whose name in the signature block had been partially obscured by a water stain, though the company name was legible, Basin Survey Group, Tulsa, Oklahoma. The survey described, in the careful language of its era, the subsurface characteristics of a 31-acre parcel in the county. It noted the presence of a significant deposit. Claire read the relevant paragraph 3 times. Then she sat very still for a long moment with the document in her lap and the cold air coming through the window and the creek running soft behind the trees. The deposit was natural gas, not a trace amount. A substantial reservoir described in the language of 1953 as commercially viable and of notable volume. The surveyor had recommended immediate follow-up drilling assessment. There was no record that any follow-up had been conducted. Because by 1955 the letters showed Thomas Harrow had lost the fight. Not in court. There was no court case, no formal judgment. He had simply, and this was the word that kept appearing in the later letters, the ones written in a hand that trembled slightly and pressed harder on the downstrokes, yielded. A word that could mean surrender or could mean something was taken. In 1955, Thomas Harrow had signed the mineral rights to Parcel 7 over to Meridian Land Holdings. The letters did not say why. The letters only said that the land itself, the surface, remained his. And then, in 1957, Thomas Harrow died. And Parcel 7 had passed, through a chain of inheritance Claire could not yet fully trace, through hands that did not know what lay beneath it, until it reached Vera Harrow, who had become Vera Marsh, who had kept the secret of her maiden name and her family land and a cabin beside a creek for 47 years, and who had left it, last in the will, to her youngest child. The daughter, the one who had been born late. The surprise. Claire looked at the 6 words on the boarded window. Come back when you're ready, V. She understood now that those words were not her grandfather writing to her mother. Those words had been written by her mother, and they had been written to her. If you have made it this far in Claire's story, What comes next is the part that changes everything. And if stories like this one matter to you, subscribe so you never miss what we find. Claire drove back to Columbus that Sunday evening with the cedar box on the passenger seat and her phone full of photographs and a feeling in her chest that she could only describe as the sensation of a room opening up inside a room she had thought she already knew completely. She called a lawyer on Monday morning, not her brother's lawyer, not the estate attorney who had misspelled her name. She found a woman named Patricia Solis who specialized in property and mineral rights disputes and who, when Claire described the situation across a phone line, went quiet in a way that suggested she was thinking rather than uncertain. "The 1955 transfer," Patricia said finally. "You have the original letter from Meridian." "I have copies. The originals are still at the property." "Good. Leave them there for now." Patricia paused. "I need to explain something to you about mineral rights and time. In your state, and in that county specifically, there are provisions under which a rights transfer made under duress or misrepresentation can be challenged. The difficulty is proving the duress. 50-year-old letters from a dead man are not nothing, but they are also not a court case." "What about the geological survey?" Another pause, longer. "Where did you say this property was located?" Claire told her. "Give me 48 hours, Patricia said. It was not 48 hours. It was 6 days, during which Claire went to work and came home and sat at her kitchen table with the photographs of the letters laid out on the screen of her laptop, reading and rereading the careful, furious handwriting of a man she had never met, but whose anger she recognized in the specific way you recognize something you have felt yourself. Patricia called on a Friday afternoon. "There's a company," Patricia said, "not Meridian. Meridian was absorbed in the 70s, then absorbed again in the 90s. The current holder of record on the mineral rights to Parcel 7 is an energy subsidiary called Crestline Resource Group. They're a mid-size operation, regional. And here is the thing I need you to sit down for." Claire was already sitting. "Crestline filed a development permit for that parcel 14 months ago. They intend to begin extraction operations. The permit was approved 9 months ago." Patricia's voice was steady and professional, and underneath it there was something else, something that had been there since their first conversation and that Claire now recognized as controlled excitement. "But here's what Crestline almost certainly does not know. The original 1955 transfer document, and I found a copy in the county records because Thomas Harrow filed everything, he was meticulous, contains a clause. A reversion clause, standard language for the era, often overlooked. If the mineral rights holder fails to begin development within 50 years of the transfer, the rights revert to the surface owner." Claire's hand tightened around the phone. 50 years, she said. The transfer was dated March 1955. 50 years would have been March 2005. Crestline's permit was filed 14 months ago. They are, conservatively, 17 years past the reversion window. The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car moved down the street, its sound rising and then receding. "The mineral rights already belong to me," Claire said, "if my reading of this clause is correct, and I am quite confident that it is. The mineral rights reverted to Vera Marsh no later than 2005. Vera Marsh passed them to you through the will. The land, the surface, and everything beneath it. All 31 acres." Claire set her phone face down on the table and looked at the wall for a long time. She thought about her mother sitting in that lawyer's office, Vera Marsh, who had kept her garden and her opinions and her secrets with equal diligence. Who had known? Had she known? Had she understood the reversion clause? Had she tracked the years? Had she understood that the rights would come back? Or had she simply held the land because her father had built something on it and she could not bring herself to let it go? Claire thought about the 6 words on the boarded window, the cedar box tucked under the oilcloth with the deliberate care of someone preparing for a long absence. "Come back when you're ready, V." Vera had been ready. She had been ready for decades. She had simply been waiting for Claire to be. The hardest moment came not in the lawyer's office, and not on the gravel road, and not standing at the fence in the October cold. It came on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after Patricia's call, when Claire's brother Daniel phoned. She had been expecting this. Patricia had advised her that under the probate process, any claims against estate assets would become a matter of semi-public record, and that family members might hear through various channels. Daniel's voice was careful in the way of someone who has rehearsed. "I've been talking to a friend who knows about mineral rights," he said. "He says that land might be worth something, with the right development." "I know what it's worth," Claire said. A brief pause. "We're family. Mama would have wanted. Mama left it to me." She kept her voice level, specifically to me, after she left everything else to you and Robert and Marcus. "That was the estate lawyer's recommendation. We didn't—" "She misspelled my name on the envelope," Claire said. The sentence was out before she had decided to say it, but it was the right sentence, and she let it stand. Daniel went quiet. "I have a lawyer," Claire said. "If you or Robert or Marcus want to pursue a claim against the estate, she's the person to contact." She gave him the number. Then she said, without calculation and without warmth, "I hope you're well, Daniel," and ended the call. She stood at her kitchen window for a long time afterward, looking at the street. The feeling in her chest was not triumph. There was something else there, something adjacent to grief, the particular ache of a confirmation you had both hoped for and feared. Her brothers had known. Not the details, not the mineral rights or the reversion clause, but the shape of the exclusion. They had known their mother had favored them, had given them the visible things, the objects and the accounts and the silver candlesticks from Portugal. And they had not questioned it. They had simply accepted the inheritance and moved to the next thing, the way people do when an arrangement suits them. But Vera had also known. Claire turned that thought over carefully. Her mother had placed her last in the will, yes. Had given her the cursed land, the 31 acres that no one wanted. But she had also left a cedar box under an oilcloth in a stone cabin beside a creek. She had left a key that fit a lock that turned easily. She had left 6 words on a board. This was not neglect, this was precision. Vera Marsh had understood her sons. She had understood what they would do with visible wealth, take it without examination, the way they had taken her cooking and her care and her silence throughout their lives as things simply owed to them. And she had understood that if she left the real inheritance where they could see it, it would be absorbed the same way, divided, sold, never examined. So she had hidden it. She had hidden it in the place that looked like nothing, like loss, like a mistake. She had put it in the last position on the list, in an envelope with a misspelled name, and she had waited. Patricia Solis filed the formal challenge to Crestline Resource Group's development permit in November. The filing was clean and thorough and cited the 1955 reversion clause with the kind of confidence that comes from having checked a thing 3 times before stating it once. Crestline's legal team responded within 2 weeks. Their first response was dismissive, boilerplate language about the validity of the original transfer, the integrity of the chain of title. Patricia had expected this. She filed a supplementary document that included the original geological survey from the cedar box, properly authenticated, and the letters, and a certified copy of the reversion clause extracted from the county records. 2 weeks after that, Crestline requested a meeting. Claire drove back to Harrow Flat on the morning of the meeting, arriving 2 hours early. She parked her car at the gate and walked across the flat land in the early light, the grass pale and silver with frost, her breath white in the cold air. The cottonwoods had lost their leaves. Their bare branches made a pale filigree against a sky going blue at the edges. She walked to the cabin and stood in the doorway. The cedar box was still there, on the floor where she had left it, though she had taken the letters and the document to Patricia's office. The photograph of Thomas Harrow was still inside, wrapped in the flannel cloth with the small dense thing that clinked. She unwrapped it now for the first time and found what she had somehow not been surprised to find. A compass. Brass, old, the face marked with the careful engraving of a craftsman who took the work seriously. It turned in her palm with a faint, sweet resistance. The needle settled north, steady as breathing. She turned it over, engraved on the back, in letters small enough to require care. For the one who comes back, T.H. Thomas Harrow, her grandfather, a man she had never met. She closed her fingers around the compass and stood in the doorway of the cabin he had built and looked out at the 31 acres that had been taken from him and had found their way back across 70 years and 2 generations. Through the hands of a woman who kept her secrets with the same diligence she kept her garden. The meeting with Crestline took 3 hours. It was held in the offices of a regional mediator in the county seat, a building that smelled of coffee and industrial cleaning products, and nothing like old carpet or printer toner. Claire sat on one side of a long table with Patricia beside her. Crestline sent 2 lawyers and a representative from their operations team, a man named Leonard who wore a hard hat as a lanyard clip and kept touching it, the way people touch things that remind them who they are. The negotiation was not simple and it was not quick, but the law was clear. Patricia had made the law clear. The reversion clause was valid. The development permit had been filed 17 years after the rights had legally reverted. Crestline had no claim. What they had was a problem because they had already invested in pre-development surveys and preliminary site preparation. They wanted a licensing arrangement. Patricia had prepared for this. By the end of the 3rd hour, Leonard had stopped touching his hard hat. The terms that emerged from the table were these: Crestline would hold a license, not ownership, to develop the natural gas deposit under Parcel 7. The surface of the land and all decisions regarding it remained entirely with Claire. Royalties, structured on a per 1,000 cubic foot basis, would be paid to her for the duration of the extraction, estimated at 30 to 40 years. The rate Patricia had negotiated was not the first rate Crestline had offered, nor the second. It was the 4th. When Claire signed the final page of the agreement and set down the pen, the room was quiet for a moment in the way rooms go quiet after something has been decided that cannot be undecided. Leonard extended his hand across the table. She shook it. She did not smile, but she did not look away. There is a man named Percy at a gas station on County Road 7 who does not know he was the first person Claire spoke to about the Harrow parcel, but who will find out one day that the woman who stopped to ask about an old fence line was the same woman whose name appeared in the county paper that spring in connection with a property dispute that people in the county had opinions about. Percy will tell the story slightly differently each time he tells it, but the core of it will always be true. She asked where the land was, and he told her, and she went. 3 months after the Crestline agreement was signed, Claire returned to Harrow Flat on a morning in February when the sky was iron grey and the air had the pre-snow stillness that quiets everything. She had made some decisions. Patricia had helped her establish a land trust. The cabin would be restored, not renovated, restored, using cedar and stone and the same techniques as the original. The creek bank would be cleared of invasive growth. The fence would be repaired with cedar posts and wire matched to the original gauge. A small meadow on the north end of the property, well away from any extraction infrastructure, would be planted in the spring with native grasses and wildflowers. She had also, over the preceding weeks, commissioned a search of her grandfather's history. What the researcher found was not dramatic, but it was thorough. Thomas Harrow, born 1911 in the county, educated through 8th grade, married in 1934, father of 1 daughter. A man who had worked his land, fought for it, lost it, and left a compass for a grandchild he would never meet. She walked to the cabin in the February stillness and stood in the doorway one more time with the brass compass in her hand. The needle settled north, as it always did. She thought about Vera in this place, in some year she could not know, tucking the oilcloth into place around the cedar box, pressing it smooth at the edges. Had she stood in this same doorway? Had she looked out at the same flat land, the same tree line, the same pale winter sky? Had she known that her youngest daughter would one day stand here with cold in her lungs and the weight of a brass compass in her hand and understand, finally, what the word inheritance actually means? It doesn't only mean what you are given. It means what was kept for you through difficulty, through silence, through the long patience of people who understood that some things need time before they can be received. It means the work of those who came before, the ground they refused to abandon even when abandoning it would have been easier. It means the deliberate decision to place something in the hands of the one who will know what to do with it, even if that decision looks, from the outside, like an afterthought. Claire pressed her thumb to the engraving on the back of the compass. For the one who comes back. She had come back. The snow began as she stood there, not dramatically, not all at once, but the way snow begins in a place that has been waiting for it. A few flakes first, and then more, and then the whole pale field going soft and white and quiet around her, The cottonwoods at the creek standing bare and patient in the new silence, the fence line disappearing into white at both ends, and the stone cabin at her back solid and cold and older than anything else on this land except the land itself. She thought about the envelope with her name spelled wrong. She thought about the feel of it in her hand, thin paper, the wrong name, the table at the end of which she had sat, while her brothers received their visible inheritances, and she was given what looked like nothing. What she held in her hand now was not nothing. It had never been nothing. She closed the compass. She put it in her pocket. She stepped back inside the cabin and breathed in the smell of cedar and old stone and the cold. And she understood that the 6 words on the boarded window were no longer a message waiting to be received. They were an answer. She had always been ready. She had simply needed to find the door. Some things can only reach you through the hands of those who loved you quietly, without display, with the long patience of someone who plants roses along a south wall and tends them through droughts and split pipes, and the slow, indifferent passage of years. Some inheritances arrive without ribbon or announcement. Some are tucked under oilcloth in a cedar box, in a stone room beside a creek, and they wait. Through decades, through silence, through rooms full of people who looked at a piece of flat land and saw only what was on the surface. They wait for the person who will kneel down in the cold and open the lid and stay long enough to understand what they have found. The compass in Claire's pocket was pointing north. It had been pointing north for 70 years, waiting for her to ask. If this story stayed with you tonight, share it with someone who carries the same quiet. Someone who was placed last at the table and has not yet found out what was waiting for them. And subscribe so the next story finds you when you need it. Circular details used in this script. 1. The envelope with Claire's name spelled wrong, planted in the hook as the first object in her hands. Returns in the confrontation scene, spoken aloud to Daniel, when it becomes not a grievance, but an insight into her mother's design. By the final sequence, the misspelling is understood as a kind of code. What looked like oversight was intention. The wrong name was a marking, a way of separating the surface from what lay beneath. 2. The brass compass, introduced briefly in the trigger section as the small dense object that clinks in the cedar box, then left unopened until the closure section when Claire finally unwraps it. The engraving for the one who comes back, and the initials TH connect Thomas Harrow's original loss to Claire's eventual return across 70 years. The compass points north in the first moment she opens it, and it points north in the last line of the story. The same physical fact, carrying entirely different weight. 3. The phrase "come back when you're ready," found written on the boarded window in the trigger section, initially misread as the grandfather's words to Vera, then understood in the twist section to be Vera's words to Claire. Returns transformed in the final paragraph of the closure section, when the 6 words are described not as a message waiting to be received, but as an answer, the reader having now earned the full meaning of what readiness in this story actually required.